I find myself at this juncture now because I think if people are on this journey with you and, well, they may view this as a crescendo. Like, like, man, this person got tenure, got this really early, got married while she's getting this thing, right? Still finished her program. People were worried. All this stuff is, like, you did all these things, had the children. She has it all, like, or I can imagine that, like, they can view that, like, how does she keep her awe of God? And so, kind of at that moment where you're doing well, you're teaching, right? You're having this position, you're serving in ministry. To talk about a time where you feel like God had to blow your mind again in a way that kind of spurred you on to mission, where it was like, okay, God, okay, all right.
I have a definite story for that. And let me just say, I'm going to answer that. Let me just say really quickly, I love what you were saying about even if you have a different worldview. A lot of my students, some of them are Christian, some of them are not. A lot of the folks that I work with. So it's really understanding, that we still all have purpose, however you believe, to your point, that we have been created for something. We have been created for purpose. And that's what, for me, empowerment is, helping people find their purpose. To answer your question, 2017 was the time that God had to, make me pivot almost against my will, and B, blow my mind in the pivot. So in 2017, long story short, my mom had breast cancer and it metastasized. So, I'm flowing along. I'm being actually groomed for administration. I was on my way to working my way up to becoming a president of the university. I'm doing it. My mom gets sick in 2016 and I drop everything. My husband was like, go. Our children were young. I took a leave of absence from school and came to Atlanta to be with her. The goal was for, God to heal her, restore her, for her to get well. My husband and I were then going to relocate, have her live with us. Again, we're going to live happily ever after. Well, time goes on and it becomes clear that she's not going to outlive this, right? 2017, March of 2017, she transitions. And so I have to make a decision now. I've taken a leave of absence. My school was phenomenal, but all of my family were in Atlanta. She is the matriarch of our family. Who now is going to take that position? And often that's what happens within families. Somebody steps up to try to fill a void, especially when it's the matriarch. So my husband and I make a really difficult decision to move to Atlanta. Now, Lawrence, in my mind, I've got this experience. I've got credentials. I have all of these things. Atlanta is a college town. All of these universities here. I've been teaching part-time for a liberal arts school here. They loved me. I loved them. Natural fit. There's going to be a position open. I'm going to step right into this position, never missing a beat. Well, God had a very different, from my perspective, God had a very different pathway for me. At the same time that we were moving here, my husband and I had set up a consulting firm because we do grant writing and we do diversity, equity, and inclusion work. But I was doing that sort of part-time. That was never anything that I was going to be doing full-time. So long story short, fast forward, the position at the liberal arts school fell through, didn't work out. There really weren't other positions that were open. Didn't know that a little bit later we would have this pandemic. But all of these things were happening. And to be honest, I was like, God, I've never been in this position. Every door that I felt like you were opening, I've always walked through them in the way that I envisioned, right? But what God did, Lawrence, was without ever advertising, God increased my clientele for our consulting firm 100-fold, 200-fold. I was now, I have clientele all across the country. Grant writing, bringing in hundreds of thousands of dollars in our career, over millions of dollars. I didn't see this coming, but God did. And so what it did was it opened up the opportunity for me to be flexible, to be home with my children during the pandemic. I never would have thought. I have the opportunity to work with a number of different groups who are really grappling with these issues. I never would have thought that. And to be honest, financially, I'm doing better than I ever would have done in the academy. And I still get to teach part-time and be with students, which is a love of mine. So the point that I'm making is I never didn't see this in my journey, but God caused a pivot. And when I finally said within myself, I'm just going to do what I do. I'm going to go with the process and believe that that anchored prayer that I prayed years ago would still produce fruit all of these years later. God blew and is continuing to blow my mind in this regard.
There's so much in that, I always, like I said, just breathe at moments. I'm gonna let that breathe a little bit. Breathe. The first thing that was jumping out to me as I was just listening to that is just like, number one, first, God rest your amazing mother's soul. And, for just kind of instilling in you that sense of family, to be rooted and to recognize beyond yourself and your interests that there are things greater, specifically for the family and the family of believers and the work that you're doing. So I thank you for that. Two, I think there's something about not being so committed to, I talk about like not even just the title, but even the channel, right? That no matter what it is, God is the source. So God will use He will get it to you. He will get it to you. Like, so your salvation, your security wasn't at that university, wasn't at that institution. It wasn't there. That wasn't your source. None of those things that were there, that you're the one who is like in your coming and your going was already out ahead of you, ready to provide for you, and already was going to continue to honor the word and the promise that He gave you, that you held Him accountable to. Right. I think people need to hear that. I think because of the nature of the past year, and I think for people for the lifetime, where their world's been turned upside down, they've known themselves as an attorney, they've known themselves as this doctor, they've known themselves, and then the firm has layoffs. This person has this. The church cuts staff because the tithe is not as much. All these things are happening. You're like, who am I, God? What am I going to do? And just that story is just like, God will provide. If you believe, and that you're also open, because I think